Hey everyone, here are a few key points to emphasize from Revelation chapter 19 through the first 6 verses of chapter 20 that are really helpful to emphasize to people as when you're discipling them through this story in the biblical storyline. So the first key point that I like to emphasize is obviously verses 11 through 21. Jesus physically returns to the earth. That's what you see in those chapters, riding on a white horse, leading the armies of heaven. These are like angelic armies. Likely it's the saints, followers of Jesus who have died and they've already gone to heaven, likely coming with him. So he's leading the armies of heaven and he slaughters. That's what you're seeing here in verses 11 through 21. He annihilates the Antichrist army that's gathered in the land of Israel at the time, viciously terrorizing and attacking and killing the Jewish people. And they've been terrorizing this army. The Antichrist with his army has been terrorizing other nations as well, but he's focused in on Israel. He's slaughtering Israel. And Jesus returns in 11 through 21, and he comes back as a man of war. It's the day of the Lord, and he kills every single person in this army. It's a massive army. And then he catches the head of the army, right? He catches the Antichrist himself. And it also talks about how the false prophet he throws them in the lake of fire. And so this is what you see when Jesus returns. And that's what's happening in verses 11 through 21. Then the next thing that happens in chapter 20, verses 1 through 6, is that after Jesus returns, he slaughters the Antichrist army. And he throws the Antichrist and false prophet into the lake of fire. Then he catches Satan, and Satan is locked up in the abyss or the bottomless pit, depending on your translation that you're reading. For 1,000 years, Satan is locked up in this false pit, prison, essentially, for 1,000 years, while Jesus and the saints, that's you and I who are followers of Jesus, we're in our resurrected bodies, because when Jesus returns, we get our new immortal bodies, and we're living with him on the earth, and we're ruling the nations with him. Like he's the king of all the kings, but we're actually working with him as he implements his rule throughout the nations of the earth from the city of Jerusalem and begins to restore all things on the earth from the effects of sin and the curse. And so in verses 1 through 6, it talks about how Satan is locked up and Jesus reigns on earth with the saints. That's kind of what you're reading. That's what you're reading about there. And then the third key point to emphasize is verses 7 through 15 of chapter 20. And that's the final rebellion and judgment. So at the end of that first 1,000-year period, when Jesus is reigning on the earth, Satan is let out of his cage by God. God lets him out of the abyss just for a super short time, because he has one last purpose for him. And let me explain what's happening here. When Jesus returns, there are essentially three groups of people that are alive on the earth when Jesus returns. The first group of people is the redeemed, the disciples, the followers of Jesus. You and I who have been born again and we've repented of our sin and received the Spirit. We're living for Jesus now, obeying his commandments. And when he returns, the redeemed are caught up in the air. We get our new physical immortal bodies. Our bodies are transformed. You can read about that in 1 Corinthians 15. And we actually return with him and we rule the nations with him. That's what happens to the redeemed. The second group of people at that time are the reprobate. And these are the ones who have taken the mark of the beast during that final 3.5-year period before leading up to the physical return of Jesus that we read here in chapter 19. There are many, many people on earth who have agreed to worship Satan. They worship the Antichrist and to take the mark of the beast as a sign, a pledge of their loyalty and devotion to him. And they are given over to a reprobate mind. And when Jesus returns, those people are rounded. That's who makes up the Antichrist army for sure. But those ones are slaughtered by Jesus. Also, those ones are caught and they are tried and they are executed. Okay. In the third group of people that's alive on the earth when Jesus returns are I got this term from, I think, Mike Bickle, somebody else, but are the resistors. Okay. And they're not born again. They don't know Jesus. They're not living for Jesus, but they also didn't take the mark of the beast and they're not worshiping him. So when Jesus returns, he doesn't kill every person on the earth. There will still be many people on the earth of nations. They're not born again, but they're still living on the earth, and they witness the marvelous transformation that comes as Jesus and the saints begin to rule the nations. And they witness it. And during that first 1,000-year period of Jesus reigning on the earth, many of those people will get born again. They'll hear the gospel and they'll believe, but there were some who won't. Okay. And there'll be others who are born during that first 1,000-year period. There'll be babies who are born, who some will give their lives to follow Jesus, but others will not, right? And they'll still have rebellion in their heart, but they won't be able to really fully act out the rebellion that's in their heart because there's no way to get away with it. You know, there's no demons that are energizing temptation on their rebellious nature because all the demons are locked away. But finally, at the end of 1,000 years, Satan is let out of his cage to tempt the earth one last time. And the reason for that is because everybody who ends up in the eternal kingdom of God, when all is said and done, are going to be people who were tested and they willfully chose to love and obey Jesus, even when they were tempted and had opportunity to do otherwise. And so these people who are alive and born during the millennium will be tempted. Satan's let out quickly. He goes out to tempt the nations one last time. And many of those who have rebellion in their hearts will see their opportunity and they will join in one last rebellion. And it'll be a significant number of people. They'll actually form an army and march against the city of Jerusalem, which is the capital city where Jesus is ruling from. And then fire comes down from heaven and it, incinerates all of them instantly. It's like super quick. And that's what you read about in verses 7 through 10. And then of course, Satan. And then the final point I like to emphasize is the final rebellion and judgment. So all of these people is the final judgment, including all the fallen angels and Satan himself. They stand before Jesus as a judge. Their life is reviewed and they're found, guilty of their sin, their rebellion against the Lord. And they are cast into the eternal prison, the lake of fire, where they will be forever and ever and ever tormented day and night without it to never stop. The torment will never stop. And so that's all the fallen angels, including Satan himself, as well as all the rebellious people. So all the rebels go to the same prison, the lake of fire. So that's what's happening in Revelation 27 through 15. So after that final judgment happens, that's really there's only one thing left for God to bring his redemption plan to completion. And that's what we'll talk about in the next chapter, Revelation 21 and 22. So after this final judgment, there's actually no more sin present on the earth anywhere. No more sinners, no more sin anywhere. And God's redemption plan is almost complete. And so then there's that last little part, which we'll talk about in the next video.